beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You were there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here, and this is Trish Wood is Critical, as you know. We have a multifaceted, massive, and very intense show today. So please stick around through it all because I feel on many, many levels, the stories that I'm about to tell you are indicative of our new world, where we are headed, and what a scary place it will be if we don't see and acknowledge now what is happening around us. It's a big show. I've been prepping it for quite a while. First of all, we're going to visit Uvalde, which is a story that I covered a fair bit when it happened. The actual shooting was May 24th. We did a show that week. And then we've talked about it subsequently, too, in the context of the police disengagement from the events of that day. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. And all of those deaths are important to us. That shooting was 2 months ago. And it's becoming a bit of a parable for how we live now. And that's not a stretch, and it's not hyperbole. Recently, some video, like this week, some video was released from inside the school while it was happening. And it is, for me, as a seasoned, long-term investigative journalist, including decades in true crime and justice reporting, where I've seen some pretty upsetting things that rearranged my DNA for a while. Looking at this video from the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, has done it to me again. And I'll tell you why. When it happened, I had grave doubts about the police response, including right during the week that we reported the show. Right after it had happened, I said that I felt that something had gone sideways, that they were not telling us the truth, that the timeline was not being asked about nor reported by the legacy media, that the very first news conference on that day by Chief Arredondo, who was in charge of the school policing system, felt, I think I used the word hinky, meaning that I had a very, very strong journalistic sense that they were lying about something really important and that something terrible had gone down. And part of that was through a piece of tape that I played for you at the first news conference, where Chief Arredondo was refusing to take any questions at all from the media assembled in that room. Can you imagine? And the media let him get away with it. He had this comms person come out and say, "We're not taking any questions. We're not taking any questions." And she kept repeating it like a mantra. It was the most bizarre thing. And as I said then, I'll repeat for you now, I turned to my husband and I said, something's really wrong here. That on a day, kind of like 9/11, when a community needs answers beyond scripted presentations, which Chief Arredondo did that day, to silence and muzzle reporters from asking questions, it's almost unheard of in my experience. And yet the media let that happen. So fast forward, more and more information is coming out about how the police kept parents from going into the school, about timelines of when the police actually responded to the children in the school who were being shot by this young shooter who went in unmolested, as they say. I mean, he just walked in shooting. Now we see the hallway footage and some CCP footage from outside. We can hear what happened in the school, and we can see part of what happened, and we can see full on the police response to it. And it will shake you to the marrow of your bones, unless you're inhuman. And if you're listening to this show, you're probably superhuman and super humane, which means it may affect you more. So this is what I'm saying today. I stopped swearing on the show, which is kind of my natural way of speaking, because I had some complaints from people who said, we want our kids to learn from the way you approach critical thinking. Please knock it off. So I stopped doing that mostly. I've been really good. I certainly don't F-bomb anymore. Because we wanted this show to be kind of family friendly, and mostly it has been. But this is not a day for you to have your children in the room, especially young children, because we are going to experience through sound what the children in that classroom experienced through all of their senses, including a little boy that I've been thinking a lot about. On this video, you will see that Salvador Ramos comes into the school. He goes into the classroom. I think it's 112 and 1112 were the two where he was shooting people. He goes into the classroom, guns a-blazing, literally. And this little kid comes around the corner, a young boy, and he sees what's going on, and he sees the shooter, and that the shooter is shooting into the classroom, maybe the one he was headed for. And he sneaks away and runs apparently back into the washroom. So my nightmare since seeing this footage has been, was that poor kid hiding in the washroom for the whole 77 minutes that this thing was unfolding, not able to see it, but able to hear it in there by himself? So I kind of feel that this show is putting you in his situation. And one of the things we do on this podcast is we witness for people when we can, no matter how dark. And so I feel today that we're witnessing for this kid. We're witnessing for all the kids in the school, but maybe especially this kid who had an audio nightmare alone happening in his head as the shooting went on. So this is going to be tough to hear, but I think if he withstood it, we as adults can withstand it. We can witness for this kid and fully be able to take on board the tragedy of what happens when people put their own personal safety before the good of the community. Get where I'm going with this? There is a resonance here, people, and I know that my listeners will get it. There is even a shot of one, when I say shot, I mean visual, of one of the police in the hallway, not going into the classroom, using hand sanitizer. Now, realistically, sometimes using hand sanitizer is a kind of a natural subconscious thing we do. Even I've reached for hand sanitizer in the middle of a conversation, not even realized I was doing it. That may have been what he was doing. I don't know. But I am looking at that visual and seeing what happened there and seeing it as maybe somehow philosophically exemplary of the whole deal. Was he putting on that hand sanitizer because he was afraid of COVID in the school? I don't know that. I don't know that. But it was about his safety, right? That's what putting hand sanitizer is about. It's about the person's safety. They've been told. Meanwhile, down the hall, kids have already been shot. This happens of quite a while after the kids are either dead or dying on the floor in 111 and 112 at the end of that hallway from where the police are hanging out. I don't mean to be cruel to the police. I was a true crime reporter, and I've always had a good relationship with cops. They have hard jobs, and I support them 100%. I was not defund the police at all. I thought that was unfair. I also think they make mistakes. And when they do, they should be held accountable for them. I've done a lot of wrongful conviction stories. But I cannot explain this. I also don't think this would have happened 3 years ago. I don't. Something's changed. Something has changed. We've lost our courage. Were those police acting under orders, as it's been suggested, that this was not an active shooter, but a hostage situation and they should wait or whatever is being said? All of that falls away when you watch the video or listen to the video, as we are going to do today. I think it's important for us. The other thing about this that resonates for me is the idea that these children may have been sacrificed out of fear and a yearning for personal safety, right? So it's kind of like the lockdowns, isn't it? I just did an interview last weekend with a man named Irvin Student who has been studying the lockdowns on children. And the destruction is off the charts. There's a whole group of kids who will never be rescued from the 2 years out of school. They'll never go back. They'll die young as a result of poverty. Those sacrifices of children were made by adults who were afraid. The teachers' unions were afraid. The children were sacrificed, like these police are afraid. I am not saying I don't want to be barraged with teachers' union letters. I love most teachers, the ones I know, but they were absolutely dead wrong about this, and they caused a lot of damage. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but children's welfare was sacrificed for personal safety of adults, and they were wrong. They weren't even safer because of it. There's no evidence for that. So this is why Uvalde for me is it's kind of the Waterloo of all of the things that are moving around us right now. And I think we've got to face it. We've got to face it. And I want you to do that with me today. We're going to be witnessing for those children and the little boy in the washroom. Also on the show, after we go through those tapes, Sri Lanka, the government of Sri Lanka fell. And a lot of smart people are blaming obsessive climate change zealotry and globalism for what happened there. Michael Schellenberger, who I admire, lays out a brilliant case for it on Barry Weiss's Substack, which you should all be reading. And I'm convinced he lays out the case. And I will tell you something quite personal about myself. I was a person who marched in demonstrations that more needed to be done about climate change. Up like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I can produce pictures of myself holding a sign at Queen's Park in Ontario. I will declare this here, I am now climate change kind of agnostic because I haven't had a chance to dive in. But here's what I know. I know that I cannot trust what they say, they meaning the powers that be. I don't trust them anymore. I don't trust what they call settled science. I don't trust it. I don't trust what science says is settled science after COVID because we've seen mass corruption. So we have a wonderful guest. His name is Marc Morano from Climate Depot. I probably don't agree with everything he says about climate change, but the thing I'm admitting to is I don't know. I can't even make an argument because I've got to now hit the books and do everything I've done on COVID, reread everything, phone people, call people. What do you think? What makes sense? Because I can't trust them anymore. This is what they've done to their own credibility, right? Here is what I do believe, though. I do believe that the globalists and the countries who embrace their agenda are prepared to hurt their people for loftier goals, especially if they believe something is an existential crisis. COVID was an existential crisis. Let's not forget Neil Ferguson's overhyped and florid modeling, which was proved to be total garbage. So the fact that they may well be doing this with climate change is certainly now open to interpretation for me. And if they're right, and I am wrong to question it, then they've brought this on themselves, haven't they? So Marc Morano from Climate Depot is going to explain to us how the globalist agenda about farming and fertilizers caused the downfall, the economic downfall of Sri Lanka. It was extraordinary how quickly it happened. This is why the farmers in the Netherlands, which I still call Holland, are out in force, and the same issues about fertilizer and farmland are being raised now here. What we need to understand about this is that they are prepared to sink an industry. You see it now with high gas prices. They've cut off American generated oil supplies. I mean, these things are connected, right? And they seem to be, when I say they, I mean the G7 leaders who bought into this. Clearly, I include Trudeau and Biden. I did include Boris Johnson, who's now gone. They are prepared to sacrifice their own people to meet targets. And we're not allowed to have a say. And they are frequently wrong. They were wrong about COVID. And they were, Michael Schellenberger says they were wrong to do what they did in Sri Lanka. The World Economic Forum was bragging about Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, how their influence on farming was going to lift the country out of poverty. The opposite happened. So Marc Morano is coming up after we look at these videos that have been leaked about the Uvalde shooting. So this is the part of the show where I say we could sure use your support. It is your support. We don't run any advertising here. We are completely listener supported, and we are very, very grateful for that. We have a PayPal. We have a Patreon. And you can find those by going to trishwoodpodcast.com, which is our website, and pushing the button. It either says support or donate, something along those lines, and going there. That allows us a monthly small donation so we can plan things. We also sell merch. And the merch is fun stuff. We have interesting little sayings about critical thinking. We still are selling our no hat, which we may need again in September because they're talking about doing the same stuff all over again. And we have a hat that says politically homeless, some other stuff. It's really fun. So if you're interested in declaring those things publicly, then pick up some of our merch, and that helps us subsidize the show. So thank you for considering that. And I will say also, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it. Tamara Leach has a Give, Send, Go that somebody's put up on her behalf. I probably shouldn't be promoting it on the podcast, so I won't repeat that Tamara Leach has a Give, Send, Go, which I'm assuming she's using for her legal case, and she's still in jail, people. So that is me not supporting the Give, Send, Go that Tamara Leach has. My last comment before we move into more editorial substance here is as you know, I had COVID, and then I had long COVID, which I didn't believe in, but it seems to be receding bit by bit, week by week. Praise be. I'm happy about that. And I've had a lot of good advice, which I keep promising I'll cobble into a document for Substack. I will, but I've cut back a little bit I've cut back totally on the midweek meltdowns, which were fun, and the live stream. So here is the plan. The plan is that come August, I'm going to the cottage for a 10-day holiday. And when I come back, then Dorothea and I, who are handling some of the editorial stuff together now, will start up in earnest more content for you all, including better ways to be in touch. We may do some call-in shows as well. For sure, we're going to start doing a live stream weekly, maybe more, as soon as I can figure out how to get the camera set up here. But we manage, right? I've come so far. I even have a Skype account now. So just please be patient with us. You've tolerated a kind of a lack of content. I'm still doing my Substack because that always flows naturally from a show, but I haven't been doing as much stuff as I really want to be. So that's going to kick back in kind of end of August. So thank you for your patience, and we're all very grateful to you here. Lots of response to the Marianne Cloack show, the CBC reporter who quit. because she felt and makes a pretty good case that the CBC's coverage of COVID-19 was incredibly, I shouldn't say that, was biased toward the vaccine and against criticism of the public health edicts around COVID-19. So if you want to send her a note, feel free to do so and I'll pass it along to her. She'd probably really like to hear it. She's a brave lady who did a very brave thing. So let's support Marianne. Info at trishwoodpodcast.com. So I just want to talk about Marty Macri. You probably see him he's on Tucker a lot, and he's a terrific guy. He's from Johns Hopkins. He published a piece in Barry Weiss's Substack that claims that a lot of, it doesn't claim, I believe him, that he's contacted by a lot of people in public health agencies saying that they're not following the actual science there. That says the calls and text messages are relentless. On the other end are doctors and scientists at the top level of the NIH, FDA, and CDC. Frustrated, exasperated, and alarmed, he says. It's like a horror movie I'm being forced to watch, one senior FDA official lamented. And I can't close my eyes. People are getting bad advice and we can't say anything. That particular FDA doctor was referring to two recent developments inside the agency. First, how, with no solid clinical data, the agency authorized COVID vaccines for infants and toddlers, including those who already had COVID, meeting natural immunity. A second, the fact that just months before, the FDA bypassed their external experts to authorize booster shots for young children. And then he writes, that doctor is hardly alone. So another one says, it seems criminal that we put out the recommendations to give mRNA COVID vaccines to babies without good data. We really don't know what the risks are yet. So why push it forward? A CDC physician added. A high-level FDA official felt the same way. The public has no idea how bad this data really is. It would not pass muster for any other authorization. Gee, I wonder how much Canada is relying on the bad analysis coming out of there. Here's my point about that. It's not surprising to any of us. We knew if there were people in all of the agencies, that good people must be afraid to speak. Here's the deal. Now's the time to speak. Hold a news conference, resign, go to the National Press Club in DC, hire a really good comms agency to get your message out in the mainstream media. Safety in numbers, resign. If you're claiming criminality on behalf of the agency, if you're saying they're not keeping children safe, resign. Do something. Talking to Marty McCary is not going to solve it. He's a great, great guy, and he's got a lot of courage for publishing this. But, I mean, worse things have been said about all those agencies, and they've done nothing. They're being protected by somebody. Who knows who that is? But anyway, these things, you see, they're all tied together. A lack of courage. Where is courage? Where is courage? I think Mark Twain had a really good saying about courage. I'm just going to read it before we get into the Uvalde story because that's what's lacking here. It was really good, but I can't find it, so I won't do it. Hang on. No, I don't know what happened to it. Oh, sorry, here it is. Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. See? So some people understand that well and others don't. Now let's get into, I'm going to take you inside the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. So this video I'm going to play for you, it starts at about 11:31 in the morning. And we're going to listen to events as they happen for the first few minutes. What I'm looking at in the video is an exterior shot of the school. and you can see the shooter walking towards the school and shooting a gun. And what you're going to hear next is there is a teacher who has seen him, perhaps through a window, and is warning people. And I do believe she also makes a 911 call that we can hear her making. And then she screams and starts warning the students. So I'm telling you, this is upsetting. And if you feel that it might be too much for you, turn the podcast off. As I said, I think we should feel that if the kids withstood this, we should too. And nothing tells the story of what went wrong that day better than what I am about to play for you now. So this is time stamped at about 11 o'clock, 31 minutes, 37 seconds in the morning of May 24th, 2022, exterior of Uvalde School. We're going to be hearing a teacher or some female employee inside.
I can't see him now. I cannot see him. No, all I saw was the target. He's all standing. He's shooting. I haven't said anything when the kids are coming. The kids are running.
She said he's firing at the school. He's shooting. She can hear the shots from outside.
Get in your room! Get in your room! Get in your room! Get in your room!
Still outside. And you're going to hear her wonder where he is. She asks where he is. She says, is he inside?
Is he inside the building? Is he inside?
So we're now at 11:32:45. And on this video, I'm still looking at an exterior shot of the school, and it's about to switch over to the interior shot as the shooter enters the school. Here it is. So he's coming in through the side door. He's dressed like a gunman in a video game, black outfit, holding the gun across his chest, and he's heading directly to a classroom around the corner at the end of the hallway. And at about 11:30. Okay. So this is where he starts shooting, and what I just seen, and I was not able to describe in the moment, is this little boy who comes around the corner, sees the shooter, sees him start shooting, and then he runs away apparently to the left. What you're going to hear now is the length of time that the shooting went on in Uvalde. I'm just going to let it roll. Okay, I'm just going to stop it there. So this is where the police enter, and they run toward where the shooting is coming from, and shots are fired, and they run away from the classroom toward the end of the hallway. This is what transpires. This is at about 11:36:01. They've just entered and are running toward the classroom, but they don't stay there for long. More police arrive. There's 2 or 3 of them down by the actual classroom. There's 4 of them standing where this camera is, where we're getting the hallway view from. And they're kind of quietly. Okay. So more shots are fired. You could hear that, and the police retreat from the classroom. They run away. Okay, so not much happens. There's sporadic gunfire at that point. We're now at 11:37:35, and there's not really much happening from a police perspective. As I say, he entered the school at about 11:32. And we're now at 11:37:35, and still no attempt to rescue the children. So I'm going to now move to a shorter edited version of this and take you right through till the end. It's just a few minutes long, but I wanted you to hear this version because it's one of the few versions you can access that actually has the whole length of time that initial burst of shooting happened. And I will also remind you that the screams of the children were removed from this video. So we're not hearing everything that happened that day. We are hearing the shooting and we're hearing the police, and we're going to pick this up about 19 minutes later, and I'll walk you through that. So at this point, a whole bunch more police arrive. Still no rescue attempt. 36 minutes later. 48 minutes later, 4 more rounds are fired. Still no attempt. 48 minutes later, they're just congregating in the hallway there. And they make some kind of a move at 12:21:28. They start toward the classrooms 111 and 112, where we now know that children and teachers have died. So at about 12:50, the gunman is killed by the police officers who finally breached the classroom there. So that is the video from the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. And those were the sounds of children and 2 teachers being slaughtered, while, boy, at the end there were many, many, many police officers in that hallway before they went down and got them. I'm not being mean to these cops. They're going to have to live with it for the rest of their lives. You know, I think people will probably study this for years. What took over? Was it a kind of a group think? If 4 guys had gone to confront him, would they all have gone? I mean, the group dynamics are strange, strange things. And I'm prepared to consider the idea that that's perhaps what was going on here, or something else that maybe explains it. But I think we still have to ask the question, why in all of those men, and I do believe they were all men, at any point their natural human instinct to protect women and children, I believe there was a male teacher in that one of the classrooms too, because I think I saw him interviewed, why their natural instinct to go in and save people did not overcome other things that were happening. This will be studied by psychologists forever, right? And these things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in context of what's going on in the broader culture. So that's what we have to look at here. And like I have said to you earlier in the show, I don't believe this would have happened 5 years ago. I don't think I think it's connected to other things that we explore on this show every week. Talking about cowardice, I want to play for you the tape of the Uvalde City Council meeting that occurred after the wonderful journalists at the Austin American Statesman and KVUE TV got these videos and went with them. Bravo to them. This is real journalism here, people. This is what journalism is about. These people smelled a rat and they got the information we needed to fully, of course there'll be more context, but there's not much more to be said after listening to and hearing this video. So props to the Austin American Statesman. Like I said, I wish they'd applied the same critical thinking to their COVID coverage, but whatever. So here is City Council being mad at these brave journalists who did the right thing and got this, and both played it on TV and then ran the videos also within the print media coverage that they were doing and characterized it. Here is their response to it. It is lily-livered and cowardly, even the way they are responding to the release of this information. Let me just tell you one thing. These videos belong to the taxpayers. They belong to the people. And they were stalling. And now they're saying they didn't want to put it out because the family should see it first, which is a wonderful idea, but not in the face of learning the truth. So here is the audio of that.
Well, 2/3 of the family, or part of their families, are in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yes, sir.
And they're going to have to turn on the TV and see that tonight, not even with the rest of their family. This was wrong to do it this way. The video needed to be released, but the family should have got to see it first.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
The mayor said chicken, it was chicken shit
Yeah.
to release that video the way you did it. That part of that video was not supposed to be in what they're doing on Sunday. That was not supposed to be there. They did that for ratings and they did that for money. And that's the only reason they put that out there.
What about the cops? Are they chicken shit?
We're gonna handle that.
He said that they did a good job. You still think they did a good job?
Adam, I'm not going to get into an argument with you on that deal. I haven't seen the video yet, but I can tell you that one of the officers you called, they got grades in that deal. In that video, he goes back down that hall 3 times trying to get in that room. 3 different times. 3 different times.
Ask everybody if they think that.
I know what everybody thinks, and we need to let the investigation come through.
It's chicken shit. You got to get raised by sheetrock.
Y'all are attacking the media. Y'all should attack
Yeah, you
the
should
cops.
attack them cops that did nothing.
You're missing the point, Adam, because you don't want to hear but what you want to hear. I have said from day one that every agency that was in that hallway has to be accountable for their actions that day. Everyone. No one will be exempt. That includes local, school, federal, state. Everyone has to explain their actions that day. Everybody has to be accountable. Ms. Castro?
So there you have it. Something for us all to think very deeply about. And you're probably shaken up, as I was the first time I saw this. But I think we can't turn away. Okay, Sri Lanka. Also a big story. So there was a wonderful piece written by Michael Schellenberger, and he was the one who prompted me to get in touch with Marc Morano about the Sri Lanka story. The Michael Schellenberger story was headlined "Green Dogma Behind Fall of Sri Lanka," and the cut line, "Organic farm advocates said they wanted what's best for the 22 million people on the island nation off the coast of India. What went wrong?" So we're going to talk to Marc Morano about that right now. He's joining us to talk about Sri Lanka. Hi, Marc. How are you?
Very good. Hi, Trish.
Hi. I was pretty surprised how quickly Sri Lanka fell, and actually had a bit of a laugh over the peasants having a dip in the palace pool or whatever it was, as all revolutionaries should. But I suspect that you were not surprised. Did you see this coming? And if so, why?
Well, what's happened here? We're finding it in Sri Lanka. We're finding it in the Netherlands. It's also happening in Albania, also in Poland, also in Canada. These are the new, essentially net zero climate regulations to cut back on fertilizer. And it's nitrogen, which makes nitrous oxide, which, the climate agenda says is a more potent, planet warming gas than carbon dioxide. And we have to rein in these farmers who are destroying the planet. Now, keep in mind, this is only one part of a war on modern agriculture, because they're also separately going after cow emissions, which is methane from their burping and the other end. We even have the spectacle of Prince Charles recently endorsing face mask device for cows that's allegedly would capture their burps. I mean, they look like Anthony Fauci wannabes out there with masks on.
Did he actually? Is that true? Did Prince Charles actually suggest a mask for cows?
Yes. What it is there's some startup company in England had this idea, and this idea is you put them on a cow and it catches the methane, when methane is supposed to be a more potent gas, and it's not, because there's actually multiple scientific studies, peer-reviewed journals. Methane is not a concern when it comes to climate. But yes, Prince Charles liked the idea. It was by a young startup company, and he publicly endorsed it and did some photo ops, and so they're trying to get funding for it. So yeah, it's actually a true story, not just a throwaway point. It's just an illustration of the absurdity. So what's happened is, because of this agenda, all these agreements typically go back 10, 15 years. I always use the example of Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor of California. He committed California to any number of insane climate goals, destroying future energy production in California. And well, now you fast forward, Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor back in 2005, 2006, 2007. He passes this climate bill. He's hailed as a hero. And at the time he gets out of office, there's no cost to him. All he did was make a bunch of future pledges many years in the future when he'd be long out of office.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, he did a private jet commute to office. He at the same time, he was commuting via daily private jets, because his home was nicer than the governor's mansion in California. He didn't want to live in a shack called the governor's mansion. He was telling people to air dry their clothes to save emissions. But he's important to the story, because he illustrates the whole point of this. What we're seeing in the Netherlands and what we're seeing in Albania and Canada and Sri Lanka was an example of pledges made decades ago, in many cases, by leaders who were no longer in power, who had nothing to lose. They got the virtue signal with no cost. So what's happening now is it's time, all these climate commitments and green energy transitions, they're now happening in real time, and people are horrified at the results. In other words, it was easy being green for a decade ago, when everything was, you were just pledging for the future. Oh, by 2025, by 2020, we're going to be X, Y, Z, and we're going to be doing that. And aren't I great? And I'm saving the planet and all that. So this is what it was about. So what's happened here is the Netherlands had this, a court ordered this in order to stay in line with their climate goals. And this is going to cut back chemical fertilizer in Netherlands. And in the case of Sri Lanka, this was actually the wacky president who got all excited and got tied up with the World Economic Forum, the architects of the Great Reset. And he did an article on the World Economic Forum bragging about how rich and wealthy and how awesome Sri Lanka was going to be after this experiment. Well, they did the experiment on organic farming. And again, this is in line with the climate goals. They did it more, the government did it voluntarily, whereas the Netherlands, it's now being imposed upon the people. They didn't vote for it. But in the Netherlands, 90% of their farmers use fertilizer. They did this cut back this experiment, if you will, in Sri Lanka. They did this experiment of organic, and absolute chaos broke out. People became hungry. The country literally the country collapsed in a matter of months. And as you mentioned, the presidential palace overrun, people sleeping in the bed, popping champagne, jumping in the swimming pool. It kind of reminded me of like when Marcos, the dictator in the Philippines, went down, and they ramaged the castle and melted Marcos' shoes and all that. But this was what happened. And this was all the green utopia that they were supposed to be lauding.
Yeah, I reminded me, I interviewed some guys who'd served in Iraq, and they were actually did a documentary called Gunner Palace, because they were billeted in one of Saddam's old palaces with a really good pool. So here are these American soldiers kind of overrunning these kind of wonderful, well, not wonderful, tacky, but magnificent old buildings. I think it's really interesting that you made the point about how green is super cool when you're a politician and it's hypothetical, right? And so
yes, exactly.
These guys all got, they all kind of did their virtue strut and, California style. But the reality is not something they have to live with, nor do they have accountability for it, do they?
No. And in fact, most of what we're seeing today, now the current leaders are also, believe me, they're culpable in all this, but most of this was done, you could go back to Tony Blair. You could even go in the U.S. back to George W. Bush for committing us to the UN process, rubber stamping every UN report, to go back to even Bill Clinton. You can go back to President Obama. Donald Trump did his best to get us out of all this, and he did. But of course, Joe Biden put us right back in. But essentially, these were goals and commitments that we've never challenged. We've accepted the narrative. Both the United States, all the European nations all over the world, all attend these annual United Nations climate summits where they openly talk about planned recessions to fight global warming, where they openly talk about how cow emissions are a greater threat to the planet than all the transportation of planes, trains, and automobiles combined. And we accept it. We support and fund these reports. We meet with them. We sign agreements. We give speeches. We support the goals. So what ends up happening is these become codified in law. Politicians all do it. So across Europe, what happened? It's way beyond just agriculture and fertilizer and organic farming. This became the mantra in Europe, and they're further along than we are. So if you want to see where the United States is headed, just take a little look at Europe. Let's take a look at Great Britain. In a virtue signal of the highest order, Boris Johnson, Bojo, and the UK Prime Minister, who's allegedly stepping down. That's kind of a neat thing. Like, I quit. Everyone hates me, but I'm not quitting for 3 months. So I'll keep there. I'd like the company executive parking spot in the meantime. I never heard of that. I mean, if you're quitting, you should quit like Richard Nixon. I resign noon tomorrow, effective noon tomorrow. Anyway. Yeah. So what's happened here is this green agenda played out in Europe. Boris Johnson in 2019, as part of this big virtue signal, has cement poured in England's fracking wells of natural gas to show how committed he was to the climate agenda, the net zero Green New Deal in Europe. And this would have provided each well 50 years of natural gas, domestic, clean, homegrown employment and energy for England, 50 plus years minimum. He pours it over because he's committed to solar and wind and the green agenda. Germany, same kind of nonsense, shut down their entire energy production. So what do? It's not like, they put up solar and wind and now they're living a green utopia. No, they said, well, in the meantime, we'll just import all this energy from Russia. So at some point, Germany's 40-50% energy imports from Russia. Well, that doesn't work out too well when you have a conflict and Vladimir Putin doesn't want to export to you anymore. So now Germany is going back, desperately burning coal, which is, much less clean in a lot of ways than natural gas. So this is the mess you put yourselves into. You affect your national security, you affect your energy security, you affect your inflation rate, your economics, you deal with food shortages, you deal with supply chain. They're now facing blackouts through every major nation in Europe, and that's coming to the United States, all because of this wonderful green agenda. Especially just go back 10 or 15 years, every politician jumping on board, outdoing themselves. The worst spectacle of this, and let me know if I'm talking too much, but the worst spectacle of this, Trish, 2000 2007. It was I can't remember what 2000. It was, I think it was in Bali, Indonesia, where they had the United Nations Climate Summit. They had all the world leaders together, and they were all outdoing each other. I am going to pledge to keep the Earth's temperature 2.5. No, I will keep it to 2 degrees. Buffoon politicians standing around making pledges about how they're going to control the Earth's temperature 50 to 100 years from now by some policy action. This was bonkers. And just to bring it home, today, Joe Manchin and New York Times announced that Biden's climate agenda is dead. He's not going to support anything. Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, has been called by climate activists, and this is not made up. They actually said he is affecting the Earth's geologic history. They actually believe, because he's not supporting some pork barrel climate spending bill in Washington, that he is impacting the Earth's geologic future. This is how insane we've become. It's modern witchcraft being applied today, where, those witches cause the weather. We have to put them to death or we're going to die. They're going to keep causing bad weather. We're going to have crop failure. It's literally no different. And by the way, the judges that condemned the witches to burning at the stake, those were Harvard-educated judges. And I have a whole thing on that in my book detailing that. So this was not backwoods, ignorant people. This was the best and brightest of society who were condemning women as witches and voting for them from the highest educated quarters of America.
Well, I think what's interesting about you and this subject for me is that, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was on the other side of this debate. I'm a reformed lefty, and it shouldn't be left or right, but it's based on embracing critical thinking. And for me now, COVID-19 policy has been so inept, so dangerous, so cruel. Let's sacrifice all these people if it saves one life in the hospital. I mean, that is a kind of crazy thinking. Watching that happen as quickly as it happened, as universally as it happened, as globally as it happened, as cruelly as it happened, I am now rethinking everything, right? And what I said, you didn't hear this in the intro of the show, I might not agree with you on every point about climate change, but what I declare now is that I am agnostic, because I know that I don't know enough, and I'm going to have to deep dive with a hugely skeptical mind everything I thought was true, because I no longer trust these people. And I think they would sacrifice each and every one of us on the altar of their own virtue signaling buffoonery, which COVID has proved to us.
Excellent point. Now, Trish, I actually devote a whole chapter to people with your political conversion. And it includes people like Naomi Wolf. It includes people like
I know Naomi,
Jimmy Dore and Russell Brand. This was an eye-opener. These were people who a few years ago would be cheering on United Nations goals or UN and Green New Deal, and their eyes have been opened. And I go through, and what you're describing is it's a new political alliance. It's no longer left versus right, but it's freedom versus tyranny. And COVID was so instrumental. In fact, everything that's happening today has to do with COVID lockdowns, because COVID lockdowns, I know the elites loved it. The World Economic Forum, UN, climate activists, Greta Thunberg, John Kerry, UN climate chief, they all praised the lockdown. This is exactly what we should have been doing for years on climate. If we can do this for a virus, we can do the same thing for climate. They love the idea of stay at home, airlines shut down, transportation shut down, the economic recession. They'd called for planned recessions. They loved every aspect of the emergency declaration and government officials, unelected government officials, ordering you to stay at home. You have a curfew, no weddings, no funerals, no backyard barbecues. Your neighbors can turn you in. You could have your water shut off by the state if you don't comply. Mask mandates, vax mandates. There were sections of America, the bureaucracy and progressive, that just ate this up.
Oh, here too. I mean, Canada is the poster child of insane. I think only Australia and New Zealand can equal us and China now in the craziness here. I don't know what it is about us. I don't know what, maybe it's because we have national health care or something. And I did feel sometimes my doctor was an agent of the state during COVID, but we embraced it and we're not over it. And people here are not many of them are not upset that masks or cheering masks should come back. Lockdowns, we need, close the schools. That we're not even doing a proper accounting of the absolute damage that was done by the stuff they've been doing for 2 years. I just want to move on and do more. I mean, I can't even believe the world I'm living in now. So yes, Naomi and Jim, I love Jimmy Dore. I think they're really smart. I think they're also people like me. I was kind of a burner, an old school, yeah, tax the rich, which I kind of still believe in. But when I saw how that played out in American politics and the dishonesty of Hillary Clinton and that whole wing of the party, and then the Russia hoax against Trump, I thought, I can't. And then woke, I just felt like I couldn't be part of it anymore. I had to. And once you start thinking that way, everything changes for you, right? It's
Yes, and that's what I detail. It's people like Bill Maher, people like Elon Musk. I mean, even Elon Musk was probably the sort of center left, whereas Bill Maher was far left. Bill Maher has become the greatest champion against COVID lockdowns and tyranny that you could ever imagine, directly at the media, directly at the Democratic politicians. So I think what's happened with COVID, though, is it accelerated all of these trends by collapsing all the economy. This is why the World Economic Forum said COVID presents a narrow, rare window of opportunity in which to issue a great reset of the world, of our economic system. And they openly said, you will owe nothing by 2030. You'll owe nothing. You'll be happy. You'll have all your food delivered by drone. The U.S. will no longer be a superpower. Meat will be a rare and expensive treat. And you'll have no privacy, but you will be very happy, and everything will be provided for you. Who will own stuff is people like Bill Gates, who's the single largest farmland owner in the United States, China, equity asset firms, the global elite. They'll own everything. And the other thing they liked about lockdowns was, remember, you couldn't go to church or your local restaurant, but you could go to your local Walmart and you could order on Amazon and use Facebook, and you could use big tech and Zoom and all that. Hey, that was great. No problem there. But in some cities, big cities in America, particularly New York, they're estimated 60-70% of small, independent, mom and pop operated restaurants went under. Why do you think the global elites would like that? Because those restaurants, the backbone of society, where you have all the small business employing, they aren't going to go along with the woke agenda. They aren't going to go along with the vax and mask mandates. They're going to be the highest level of resistance. So the more they can sweep them out and just wipe them out, the more you get back to corporate control, monopolies, and that's what they're looking for. It was the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor and middle class to the wealthy during the lockdowns, and that absolutely suited the global governing elite, if you will. That's exactly what their agenda is.
Well, what's interesting too about what COVID taught them, and certainly taught me as someone who was a former legacy media journalist decades ago, but is how obedient people are. When you gain control of the media, you gain control of the population. We all know that theoretically, but we actually saw it happen. And now they know that if they scare people enough, we will adopt the most absurd, self-harming rituals and ideas in the history of the world. I mean, I interviewed Laura Dodsworth, who wrote a book called State of Fear, about the nudge unit in the UK, working for the SAGE group to get public health compliance. And she said what freaked her out in studying it was not just that the fear worked, but how quickly the population ceded their liberties when confronted with those kinds of stories. Right? That was what shocked her the most, how little we value the freedom we have.
Yes, and it's I think COVID has opened up how the freedom can just be taken away. What's amazing is I always say that 2020 was the year conspiracy realities outnumbered conspiracy theories. As bad as it was, I think what you're talking about is people actually realized it. All of a sudden, people who thought everyone was a conspiracy theorist and didn't really think much about individual liberty, constitutional rights, suddenly when they were told, you have a 10 o'clock curfew, you can't go out, you can go to an outdoor movie theater, but you can't stay for a double feature because of COVID regulations, because if you stay for the second movie, you might get COVID, but the first movie is okay at an outdoor movie theater sitting in your car at a drive-in. And then people were like, well, wait a minute, I can't have people over for a barbecue. And you had a politician telling you to stay at home and you couldn't go to church. I think it blew away huge segments of the population that government had this power just waiting to yield it. And this is under emergency decrees. And in my book, The Great Reset, I go into a lot of that, going back to the Roman Empire, where, the idea is that the abuse of power has brought down nations, and that included through the Middle Ages. In Germany, 1933, the Declaration of Emergency Declaration allowed the Nazi Party, all their human rights abuses. Then, of course, the Patriot Act came from the not COVID, but the 9/11 Terrorism Emergency Act. And then, of course, Donald Trump, sadly, and all over the world, we signed these emergency declarations on COVID. And by the way, Biden, and here in the United States, I'm sure it's the same in Canada, I think tomorrow or the next day, they're going to be extending, or maybe it'll be today, they're extending the COVID declaration.
Yeah.
This still gives all these people, governors, mayors, you can turn into dictators overnight.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some more. I could talk to you for hours about this stuff, but I want to talk a little bit more about Sri Lanka too.
Yes.
So I was looking at some of the stats, and it says here the numbers are shocking. 1/3 of Sri Lanka's farmland was dormant in 2021 due to the fertilizer ban. 90% of Sri Lanka's farmers had used chemical fertilizers before they were banned. After they were banned, an astonishing 85% experienced crop losses. The numbers are shocking. After the fertilizer ban, rice production fell 20% and prices skyrocketed 50% in just 6 months. Sri Lanka had to import $450 million worth of rice despite having been self-sufficient in the grain just months earlier. So, I mean, it was a shocking collapse. What's the expression? It took a long time to happen, then it happened all at once or something. But was this predictable? Should people have seen this and they didn't care, or are they just fools who thought that they would force this new way of farming? And the kind of just explain to me before we address that, but they want them to switch from what kind of farming to what kind of farming? What was the switch?
Yeah, that's a great question. 25 years ago, I did a special, a TV documentary on organic food. Now, organic food is great if you're small scale or you're a wealthy, modern, living in a modern, wealthy world, and you can afford it as a niche thing. But organic food is not in any way, shape, or form able to feed our planet at the moment. The problem, it comes down to high yield. So modern chemical agriculture came out of the 1950s and 60s, and it came through these revolution in chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, where you call it basically modern chemical agriculture, which increased the yield of farms around the world. So when you had in 1968 people like Paul Ehrlich, who warned of the overpopulation bomb and foresaw mass starvation, he didn't foresee these technological farming improvements. They literally fed the world effortlessly. We had an abundance of food, and the places that still had famines, places in Africa, Ethiopia comes to mind, were mostly distribution, political issues, not because the world didn't have enough food. We had too much food. There was issues distributing it, and all that had to do with politics and economics and socialism and other things like that in war-torn areas. But it became a model success. Well, because of the climate agenda, a lot of these stories came out, this chemical agriculture is destroying the climate. We have to go after it. And of course, cows are destroying the climate with their methane and all this fertilizer. So they started, getting a panic about it. So the idea is when they switch to organic, chiefly you're not allowed to use the chemicals. When it comes to even certain food things, if you're pure organic, depending on the standards, you're not allowed to use chlorine. And there's actually, the story I did back in the 90s was some of these organic farms had higher outbreaks of E. coli and salmonella because they didn't have essentially the modern chemical disinfectants that they would use. And they were using manure for fertilizer to replace the nitrogen and all these other modern agricultural tools. And so what happened was, unless you actually stick a thermometer into this pile of manure, it has to reach, and I don't know the number, it may have been 160 degrees, whatever it was to get sterilization, unless you actually had a high quality control. And that's what they did. And at least early on, this is 25 years ago, the problem was they were spreading using manure on food crops, animal manure. And this was causing higher incidences of disease outbreak. The bigger problem wasn't just that, though. The problem was organic is not as high yield. So when you do organic farming, you need more land to get the same amount of food. And if you actually care about species extinction and deforestation, you would support modern chemical agriculture with nitrogen. Despite the nitrous oxide, despite the stream runoff, there's other ways to manage that. And obviously there's ways to regulate that, but you don't shut it down and you don't convert 100% and you don't come in and destroy all the small farms because you're worried about, fertilizer runoff in certain areas. You can deal with it in other ways. And that is a legitimate problem. That's a non-climate one. That's a local farm runoff issue, but there are ways to deal with that. You could regulate the amount, you could put in trenches, you could actually try to mitigate that kind of an issue. But the key here is modern chemical agriculture with high yield farming saved species, saved land, saved forests, saved open spaces because you didn't need as much farmland. If we convert back like Sri Lanka did, you are going to get low yield agriculture compared to what you had. And you're going to have more. What are you going to have? The same thing we're having with energy. You're going to have scarcity, shortages, price hikes, inflation, economic collapse, and calamity. And Ren, this isn't done because it makes sense. This is being done because of an ideology that we have to save the planet, an ideology that we have no other choice. And it's being implemented by bureaucrats who have no understanding of any of this. They just know that they have climate goals they have to achieve. The politicians support it. The bureaucrats are trained to implement them, and the courts are forced to enforce them.
Is it your opinion? I know this is just hypothetical, but is it your opinion that the leaders who are carrying out this agenda are willing to sacrifice the lives of their own people, or are they just stupid?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to compare this to. If Mao's great leap forward, it was I want to say 1958 or something to 62. There's a modern agricultural revolution. And so what happened was Chairman Mao in China implemented this new sort of forced farming. And because of the way the system was in China, everyone had to go along with it or you would be ostracized, possibly killed. And so on paper, it was a huge success. Mao and his central dictates in China were getting these great reports of these agricultural changes and the yields were going up and food was everywhere. Meanwhile, everyone was lying because they didn't want to get killed by the tyrannical authoritarian Chinese government. So you had this sort of forced farming for an ideology that was actually on paper a success, but it was actually ended up starving, and I believe millions of people during this time, during the Great Leap Forward. So there's a history of this. The same ideology. Think of someone like AOC, Ocasio-Cortez, or think of Al Gore. They call it the green transition. Well, a green transition means basically skyrocketing prices, shortages, blackouts, brownouts, and chaos and hunger and devastation. But in their minds, and this is important, it's not as though they're evil in the sense that they want to see people die. But I liken this to someone, they believe that we all have cancer, and the green energy transition and this organic farm transition that we have to get away from is kind of like a heavy duty chemotherapy. Yes, we're going to be vomiting, we're going to be sick, we're going to be losing our hair, we're going to be bedridden, but just think of the other side of that. You're going to be cancer-free, or in this case, we're going to be climate crisis-free, and the earth will be smiling, and we'll have made this green transition. So I think there's actually part of this movement is people who believe this is bitter medicine like chemotherapy that we need to endure because it's the only way to save the planet, and we're facing a climate emergency and we just have to put ourselves through this, and this is the way out of it, and don't worry, it's going to be this green utopia on the other side when you go through this little inconvenience. And the problem is we've been diagnosed by a quack, and even if we had the cancer, they claim that the medicine they're giving us wouldn't solve it even if we had it. So the idea is, there's no way that socialism or Marxism or the Great Reset is going to give us better weather than we've had under private property or capitalism. The earth is not going to notice a difference.
Well, and the other scary thing about how they talk about this is the idea that they have an answer to the energy issue. I mean, it does not lie in wind farms, which are a joke. It does not lie in solar panels, which you would have to stretch as far as the eye could see, totally ruining nature. in order to get enough even for a small amount. So when you say that it's a mental problem, I'm starting to think it is a bit of a mental problem, because they think, as really devoutly COVIDian people do, into tautologies that cannot be penetrated by data or logic. They go on tilt, right, when you try to talk about it in another way.
Well, you're not even allowed to. I mean, that's why COVID and climate were so close. Remember people who signed the Great Barrington Declaration against COVID lockdowns? They were deplatformed, canceled, uninvited to scientific conferences just because of their views on lockdowns. I mean, these were Nobel Prize winning Stanford epidemiologists. I mean, these were the top people you'd want to consult, and their views were cast aside for mostly bureaucrat or political appointees of public health, including people like the WHO president or Anthony Fauci or Walensky, the CDC director under Joe Biden. This is what happened. That kind of thing has been happening in the climate debate for decades. Anyone who speaks out is crushed. There's no dissent allowed. You can't even challenge their narrative. You're called a denier. You're compared to a Holocaust denier. You're called against science. You're called a science denier. And this is what they do. So there is no other side in their view. They believe that we need this transition, that that this settled science, that all scientists agree, and that we have to do this transition or we're all going to die. And yeah, some people are going to be displaced, but don't worry, because we're going to come in. And like I remember in the United States, Bernie Sanders' big proposal, we're gonna hurt the poor and low income the most, people of color, senior citizens on fixed income. And we're going to hurt them the most with this high energy costs and scarcity and shortage of green energy. But don't worry, because we're going to have a big federal program that's going to subsidize them and pay them to help them pay. And that's what you're finding now. The biggest proponents of green energy, like Gavin Newsom in California, is proposing gas credit cards for all the Californians. But what does this do? They want to collapse our current system, get everyone in our public dependent, or more and more people dependent on government, because they can't live under this chaotic, insane system that they've destroyed. They've set up now with this green energy transition. But it means now that Gavin Newsom is going to have a larger pool of voters who are going to be dependent on the guaranteed annual income, on the subsidies, on the gas cards. This is what politicians smile about. It's a win-win no matter what happens.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about ESG, because as I understand it, Sri Lanka had a near perfect ESG score. Please explain what that means and why it is the devil.
Well, the Western Green Elites. Now, this is promoted by all of corporate America, particularly BlackRock. And Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, has been a huge proponent of environment and social governance. And this is a criteria where no longer does a company get evaluated on how many employees, their pay wages, their benefits, their profit loss margin, the traditional business metric. It's basically a woke measure. How do you on climate? How are you on energy? How are you on transgenderism? How are you on, abortion rights? How are you on, any number of these type of issues? And if you score well, then you get a high score. So Sri Lanka literally did everything it could. It got a 98 scores. United States, by reference, is a 51 ESG score. And this is, so the idea is Sri Lanka did everything right. They are just the model. They are to be admired. We should all be emulating them. They are the model citizens. Well, of course, we saw what happened in Sri Lanka. And this is taking over. This is, some people have called it the end of capitalism forever if this takes hold. And it's taking hold, but there's also now pushback against it. But the gist of it is, if your company, if you get a low ESG score, you are going to have trouble getting bank loans. You're going to have trouble with getting lower interest rates. You're going to have trouble getting investors. You're going to have trouble on markets trying to raise capital, it's a way to force businesses who otherwise wouldn't deal with these issues to become woke, to start, unless you're spouting the line of defund the police and transgender, whatever they're pushing, your company is going to go under. So it's a way of forcing social pressure on you, but with the real teeth of defunding you if you don't go along.
Well, it's amazing that a country with one of the highest scores, I think it had 98% or something like that from ESG.
They just
just collapsed. So it's probably not good to have I
Yes,
never.
exactly. Well, that's the whole point, because it's not real. It's not about business. If you're a company or a country with a high score, it just means that you're a virtue signaling elite that's clueless and your people are suffering. That's all it means, because you're not actually focusing on the important things. And the important things are providing a vibrant opportunity economy with as much equality and wealth distribution as possible, and people with a freedom of movement and freedom of speech and freedom across the board, medical freedom. So this is where, the COVID again exposed what the governing, powers have always wanted, and people now see as eye-opening for people, just absolutely eye-opening.
Yeah. Do you think that these kind of populist movements of farmers in the Netherlands, I still call it Holland, but the Netherlands, and what happened in Sri Lanka, and indeed here with the truckers, are these movements going to have any real effect, do you think? I mean, surely what happened in Sri Lanka must be scaring some of these super green woke leaders.
Yeah, no, they absolutely. I mean, first of all, pre all these farming and even the truckers, there was all the vax protests starting in everywhere from France to England to Belgium and Germany. They weren't covered too much by the media. Australia, they were very important, because you have to have resistance, no matter, and it's got to be, and people have to suffer under this resistance. They have to be jailed. They have to cause chaos. There's injuries. It needs to happen, because without pushback, they're just going to go. They're going to just run roughshod. And so I think the Canadian trucker was probably one of the, two things were very important. Canadian truckers, it exposed Justin Trudeau as literally, remember, he had an envy for Chinese dictatorship.
Yes.
And we now know why. That was 2013. And he was not alone. The New York Times, Tom Friedman had done it. The climate chief, Christina Figueres, the United Nations had done it. Obama's cabinet members had done it. They all praised China's authoritarian one-party rule because it didn't have the messiness of democracy. Well, we found out why they don't like democracy. Justin Trudeau, what he did, not just in crushing them, in the streets and dismantling, but what he did with the banking system, I think really shook people. The idea that if you gave someone, a donut or a muffin, that you would then have your banking withdrawn. And then the Canadian, I can't remember, the Canadian police chief who was asked, what about family members of these? And they said they were looking into going after spouses or children or relatives of people who aided the truckers. I mean, this was stuff that's only done in East Germany and totalitarian regimes. And here it was openly talked about live on Canadian television. Huge moment. This, I think, was probably the single most important thing, was the Canadian truckers around the world. Second, I think, was what happened in the United States. And you might find this odd, but it was the parents' revolt in Virginia and a couple other places, but particularly Loudoun County, Virginia, a county in Virginia, which is about 45 minutes from where I live in Virginia. And this was parents who were protesting the mask mandates and the woke agenda, the transgender, the sharing of bathrooms. But they protested so much, it turned into an entire movement in the state of Virginia, which turned a Democrat state in Virginia to a Republican state. We elected a governor. And the same thing happened in New Jersey, where a Democrat almost lost, who had an opponent who no one ever heard of, and he had no funding. It was a no-name opponent who literally almost came within a point or two of knocking out an incumbent Democrat. That set the Democrats completely unmoored. Focus, according to the New York Times, they did focus groups. They found out that their base wanted to return to normal. So the science finally changed on COVID. It was the political science that changed. And every major liberal Democratic city in the United States after those elections pulled the vax mandates and the mask mandates, almost like a domino effect. And that is why to this day in LA and New York and Chicago, there is no mask mandate or vax mandate on the record books because of those elections, which began with protests.
I think what's different between America and Canada right now is that we do not have a vibrant and powerful conservative media. It's starting to happen, but our national broadcaster is pretty much the comms unit for the Liberal Party. I mean, that's sort of what they do. And the other ones, the other big legacy media here are also very, very much on side. They were terrible about the truckers. They repeated every dishonest story. They repeated every lie, all of which have been proven not true subsequently, which should be an issue given that he got the Emergencies Act passed on the basis of those lies.
Good point.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, and I hope we'll have you on soon when the Great Reset comes out in a couple of months. Thanks very much. Really
Okay,
useful
great.
and really, really appreciated your insight. Thanks.
Yes.
That was Marc Morano, who was talking about the collapse of the Sri Lankan government, basically on the verge of collapse for some period of time because of the World Economic Forum and the globalists mucking around with farming there and causing an economic collapse that the people were pretty darn mad about. And you know what? I don't blame them. I totally get it. It must be so very frustrating to work so hard as a farmer your whole life and then have some, hotshot guys, global guys telling you how to run your business and then having it collapse because the government has sided with the globalists. I know why they're mad. And there's some mad Canadian farmers and there's some mad Dutch farmers as well. We're going to see more. I think he said the Belgian farmers are mad too. So that was Marc Morano. He's got a few books. One of them is Green Fraud, Why the Green New Deal is Even Worse Than You Think, and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. And it's got a picture of a really cute little polar bear on a surfboard on the cover. So that's sort of fun. And then he's got a new book coming out called The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown, which is something we've talked about on the show. I think that's what they want. Are they going to lock down over climate change, declaring it an existential threat the way they did with COVID? They might. So that's a book worth looking for. I think it's not out till August or September. Okay, how does D.H. Lawrence and Lady Chatterley's Lover tie in with the theme of the show? Here's what happened. I was watching a fantastic Canadian movie, a phrase I never thought I would say more than once in my life, called My Puny Sorrows. And I fell madly in love with the movie. I love everything about it. I think the director's brilliant. The actresses were just, it's a woman's film in a way. It was just brilliant. I loved it. And what they did at the end, one of the characters read the first paragraph of Lady Chatterley's Lover. It's a book about a lot of really sad things. This is a family with massive, massive challenges. And as she was reading it, I was feeling a bit like she was describing going through COVID. So, but of course, they didn't have COVID in D.H. Lawrence's time, but they had other bad stuff, And I think that actually that paragraph was a postscript to the Second World War. But I think it applies to us, and here we go. Ours is essentially a tragic age, so we refuse to take it tragically. The cataclysm has happened. We are among the ruins. We start to build up now little habitats, to have new little hopes. It is rather hard work. There is now no smooth road into the future, but we go round or scramble over the obstacles. We've got to live no matter how many skies have fallen. Stay critical. See ya.